everyone's got a different complaint, it seems, at the moment about data center. It went from a story of inspiration over the summer. By the time Jensen Huang got here for the big GTC conference in Washington, we couldn't say enough about how early the innings were that we were in. Now there's a big worry about, boy, we're bumping our heads against the ceiling on energy capacity, on NIMBYism, on just available ground, and of course the fight over regulations. We'll start more broad here, if you would. When you see a story like this and AI stocks are popping up again, where are we in this race?
You know, I think it's a little bit like a tale of two cities. It's the best of times, it's the worst of times.
Wow.
Looking back at 2025, it's been a remarkable year of continued acceleration. You know, industry reports released a couple weeks ago showed that hyperscalers signed contracts for new data centers as large in Q3 of this year as they did in 2024 altogether. And when we think about the build out that we expect to see over the next 5 years, that's going to continue to happen. All of the challenges that you raise, power availability, water use, a general sense that society's not getting the benefits of the data center build out, those are going to almost probably get worse over that whole acceleration period rather than better.
That's really interesting because, you point water use as another one. A lot of people are just hearing about these data centers. If you live in Northern Virginia, outside of Washington, that's been your reality for a while. But somebody comes to your neighborhood, they want to put up a data center and they say, well, you're going to take my water away and you're going to make my electricity rates go up. And so it started a conversation about what can these data centers and these projects do on their own off-grid. And will that be the answer to all of them?
It won't be the answer for all of them, but it'll be a big part of the answer, particularly, I think, for the big ones. So let's say you want to build a really large data center, right? You have to spend a lot of money on the chips. You have to spend a lot of time and effort to get the right software and data in place. And one of the things we're seeing develop in the industry is, so they look at these large sort of gigawatt scale facilities, is you need to probably bring your own power. And then the real question for you as a developer is, can you build the right mix that's going to be reliable? And how much do you trust your on-site generation for providing those chips with power all the time, 24/7? Because you want to be running them. They're so expensive. You want to be running them as much as you can. And that's where we're seeing a lot of really interesting policy development between regulators and developers, so that developers can bring their own power, build quickly, not burden everybody else, but also rely on the grid when they need to.
It's really interesting. This talk of nuclear, I think for many people who've sent stocks like Oklo and Constellation to record highs this year, they're starting to come down on it. Hold on, guys. This is maybe a 5 or 10 years out story. We're not building a lot of new nuclear power plants. You specialize in energy, and I'm just curious specifically how you look at this space now, and if we're really telling a natural gas story for the next several years.
I think the story breaks down into two timeframes, Joe. Over the next few years, we have to use what's right in front of us, and that's going to be a mixture of natural gas, solar power, increasingly batteries, a big surprise over the past year, and a really strong outlook for next year. And then, of course, you've read the stories about the few nuclear reactors that are sort of constructed, recently retired, can be restarted. But, we don't have a dozen of those laying around. It's really 2 or 3 projects. Post 2030, that's really where I think the sort of new nuclear technologies could come online, where even older technologies, the large nuclear reactors that we built much of the industrial capacity of the late 20th century upon, could be back on the grid, coming back onto the grid. And then, of course, there's questions around, how much natural gas are we going to be building in the 2030s? What are the price pressures there? For the next 5 years, the story is almost kind of written. It's just how quickly can we do it? And after that, then we get into sort of policy and strategic thinking around energy sources.
I want to ask you about regulation, but with regard to power, as you see Michael Burry, the guy from the Big Short, who's been shorting NVIDIA and really questioning this AI spend, which he says is a circular investing destined to fail. He's specifically calling out NVIDIA today for what he refers to as power-hungry microchips over alternatives, questioning the longevity of, say, a Blackwell or a Rubin, and its give-and-take deals and compensation. The more efficient these chips get, the less power they'll need in a data center. Could we be in a situation where we were overbuilding or overlaying fiber, for instance, a lot of years ago, where we're designing these data centers for this massive intake of power, when at some point they're going to be in a box?
I think there's two ways to look at that question, whether you're looking at it from the firm level or from the sort of societal level. You know, in our modeling, we incorporated significant efficiency gains in the accelerated chips necessary for AI.
So that's already part of your view.
We already see 90 gigawatts of data center demand in the U.S. by 2030 for AI alone, that leave alone traditional web services. And that's a medium to upper end estimate when you look across the range of consulting firms and industry specialists. So efficiency doesn't get you out of the need to build a lot of new data centers. Now, it could be, like, for a variety of reasons, we don't end up needing all that capacity.
Sure.
Maybe it's a bubble, something like that. If you
there
built
goes $1 trillion.
So say you built a lot of electricity generation capacity, society can absorb that capacity.
Okay.
AI data centers are the big story right now. There's a lot of market correction and adjustment happening because this is just a tidal wave of new demand.
Right.
But if you look at the next 20 years, we expect to see significant electricity demand growth in the United States for a variety of reasons. You've got reshoring of manufacturing. Chip fabs take 500 megawatts to a gigawatt themselves. You've got electrification of the light passenger duty fleet. You've got electrification of homes and businesses, and you've just got economic growth. You know, the story of the last 15 years in energy and electricity for the United States was one of plenty of new supply and major efficiency gains, mostly because of LED lighting. Over the next 20 years, we need a lot of electricity. It's fundamental for our economic security and growth. And so I'm very sanguine about the risks of overbuilding
you can't
electricity
have too much, it sounds like,
over the next couple decades.
The EO that President Trump signed recently on a federal landscape for AI regulations versus each state having its own and creating a patchwork here. And he says, if you're NVIDIA, you just can't do business easily enough. It slows things down to the point that we'll lose the AI race. Is he right?
I think that everybody, when you talk to, I talk to my colleagues at CSIS, you talk to people here in town, everybody agrees that a federalized system would be better for diffusion than a patchwork. What does that federalized system look like?
That's the issue.
It's a political
They still
debate.
have to write that, don't they?
Yeah, of course. And I think there are big debates about how do you incorporate safety, how do you deal with minors, how do you deal with privacy, and you know, whether you're a federalist or you look at federal authority as being the key here. We still need to get over these big political debates. The structure of the regulations is only half the battle.
The content side is of course one thing, and we can talk about whether AI is eventually going to eat us alive. But in terms of the data center build out, having a federal policy would hasten the end of this race, would it not? Sure,
and we've seen from the Department of Energy in particular a real effort to use federal authority to help speed the build out on the electricity side. They've made significant investments in nuclear power to help deal with the sort of sustainable growth of the industry in years forward. But they've also looked to change the way regulations apply to large loads like new data centers, sort of federalizing the way that works. That's traditionally a state responsibility. There's an ongoing case at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the federal body in charge of the electricity grid.
Friends at FERC.
To figure out how to do that, right? And there again, there's some political debates. Who needs to pay for grid upgrades when you're building new data centers? But FERC's in a good position, I think, to resolve a lot of those things and make sure that the best models are used nationally.
Really interesting. This has been a fascinating conversation. That build out still has another 5 years. Is the first point you made. That's right.
If you're in a second industrial revolution, it might be 25.